recording. Minimize that junk. Okay. Hey, this is Jeff at Backhand Bikes, and I've been asked a few times how I keep very large assemblies with fixtures, various fixtures, and even different variations of a similar component. And how do I keep all of that straight and all working simply with all the setups? So here's an example of a part. It takes multiple pieces. It's an assembly. It's just a big piece of styrofoam, basically. It gets glued together, but I have a left side and have a right side. So I have a stand-in right side inside of a component. So basically, I'm going to start here. I'm going to make this part, and then I'll make the right side, which I have oriented so it lines up with all my fixtures. So let's start with just the left side. The first setup in Operation 1, it cuts the inside and leaves all my bosses and everything. And I'll run that for the left and the right side. And then you can notice, here is my code. Setup 1, it's aligned to my fixture. And here's all the operations that go along with that. And then in setup 2, he corresponds with this one, with this setup. And then so on. So I have setup 3. That's after I glue them together. So then I have a stand-in. So I've made it as simple as possible to know which operation or which fixtures are associated to which setup. Here's another example. Here's a set of jaws. And the goal here is I had some prototype parts to make. And instead of making the fixtures or machining them as I go and having to start and stop, I machined the jaws as one operation. Everything from the top perspective. So if we go down to my machine jaws operation, here's everything that it took to machine my jaws. Now once those were done, I could simply insert a part, hide my machine jaws, and go to setup 1. Now setup 1 had everything I needed. It had my stock and a stand-in part, so I can run 2 at a time. And the same thing with setup 2. Setup 2, I could flip them over immediately. I didn't have to change my work fixture offsets. I could run op 1 and then flip it, load up the program for op 2, and start, and so on with my setup 3 when I put those really tedious little teeth on there. And so notice in all of these, my work coordinate system never changed. My tool length offsets obviously never changed. The only thing I did was progressively move the part station to station until I was done. Now, here is how I model a very simple example of how I would progressively model the fixtures until I get to the last operation. So you can see in this part, it's going to need 3 operations. One, I'll need to machine the top, the bore, and drill the hole, the profile. Then I'll need to flip it, remove the material, deburr it, and then I'll need to stand it up and drill and tap that hole. So there's my 3 operations. So how would I go about modeling my fixtures progressively? So notice I have all the standard stuff you would expect. I've drawn my stock. I've drawn the jaws. So in this first setup, there's really no reason to model any fixtures. I'm just going to clamp this in a pair of steel jaws. Run the top, run the bore. But op 2, I'm going to flip it over. And there's no good way to hold that. I'm going to have to make some custom jaws really for that. So here's my custom jaws, just randomly drawn in. So what I can do is click on the jaws, rotate them 180 degrees, not 185 degrees, and just for time's sake, we'll just move them up to where it is. So now we're going to flip and face this part. So I would simply use a combine and remove that material. But what we're going to do first is create a component. I don't want it activated, but I want to call it setup 2 for the second operation. Now, what I need in here is obviously my jaws. I'm going to leave my part outside and also the stock because I'm mainly using the stock for operation 1. Now, I'm also going to create my third operation, setup 3. So for the first operation, a simple face deburr, but what I'm going to do with the jaws is because I want them to be progressive with the way I model and the way I machine, I'm going to copy those and then I'm going to paste them inside the new setup. But I don't want to paste as new, I want to paste as an instance. And that way any change that I make on the first operation will show up in all my setups. So my jaws will accommodate every operation. So on this operation, I want to go ahead and move my jaws into position, relative position, to where I would need them for machining that last operation. Something like that, I'd need to, and because this is a inside of, they were modeled together, they're inside one component, then what I can do is simply align this face to the face I'm going to be clamping on and move those into position. Now, on this, if I want to go ahead and model how I'm going to do it, say I want to combine these two, cut, keep the tools. When I hide my component, notice I have my geometry here. I'm going to click these and delete. I got some shortcuts on my 3D mouse that John Saunders doesn't like. Boom. Now I've got my fixture design for operation 3. And if you notice, when I bring up operation 2, that cut is already in there. And when I show my part, I do another combine here, minus this. I'm going to keep those components. I'm going to do that again for here. Boom, boom, boom. Hide that part. I got to make the sound effects or it doesn't work. There we go. Around to the other side, click, click. And there we have it. Now, I'll machine these jaws before I even start working on the product, the part. And they'll follow through progressively. And notice my part never needs to move. I didn't make any copies of the part. And that's nice because that could be a linked component. And if somebody changes the design, then I'll quickly find out that the fixtures don't fit anymore. So that keeps everything associated nice and neat. And then when I start creating my setups for setup 1, I just make sure my stock is highlighted. It's flipped over. I've got my stock. Got my part. And then for setup 2, I just hide my stock, show setup 2, rotate it over. Here's my fixtures. There's my part, and I want my Z, my X, and then my original stock point. And then I would do that also on 3. And I can actually just copy this setup, copy, right click, yep. Call him 3. Edit, bump, bump, and then select my new point here. Everything corresponds. So I've got setup 3, setup 2, and setup 1. I hope you enjoyed this quick tip, and I hope that saves you some time whenever you're running prototypes or even production. Stop.